Okay, good evening everybody. My name is Peter Murphy. I'm with the Politics in the Pub Committee. I want to welcome you all here tonight for another really good forum within a progressive framework in Australia's debate. Tonight I want to first acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. That's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay respects to their elders past and present and acknowledge any Aboriginal people here in the audience tonight. The topic I think is really very, very current. What's behind the crisis in Venezuela, Brazil and Argentina? I think if you've been watching the news, you'll know that there was a peace accord signed in Colombia just last week, that the president of Brazil was impeached and deposed. So there's another set of events taking place in Argentina, also really big political turmoil. So this is all part of a great big global story as well. So I hope the two speakers we have tonight will really illuminate this issue for us, and you can ask some really good questions and get information. The first speaker we will have tonight is Dr. Fernando Lopez. He holds a PhD in history from the University of New South Wales and a Bachelor of Arts and Honours in History from the same place. Together with Pablo Leighton, he co-directs an organisation called Latitudes, Latin American Research Group Australia. He's in charge of Latitudes' upcoming research project called Down South Atlantic, which explores diplomatic relations and economic ties between Australia and the dictatorships of Uruguay, Brazil and Argentina during the 1970s and 1980s. His areas of research focus on contemporary Latin American history and the Cold War in Latin America. And I can announce that he's got a book that's just come out. It's called The Feathers of Condor. He's got a fan club too. Transnational State Terrorism, Exiles and Civilian Anti-Communism in South America. You can look for this on Amazon.com. I don't think it's available in Australian bookshops at present. So that's great. The second speaker we have tonight is Dr. Peter Ross. He's a senior lecturer in Spanish and Latin American Studies at the University of New South Wales. He took his undergraduate degree at Sydney Uni and his PhD at UNSW. His principal area of research, which he pursued with Dr. Jim Levy, is a comparative study of investment in human development in Argentina and Australia between 1890 and 1960, so it's a very big sweep. Subsidiary research interests include changes in the composition and internal dynamics of families in Latin America, contemporary political developments in Latin America, and environmental effects of development in Amazonia. So it's going to be a great night. I'd like to first of all invite Dr. Fernando Lopez to come up and open up the proceedings. Thank you very much.
First of all, good evening everyone, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel tonight. It's a real pleasure to join Politics in the Pub. It's something that since I arrived to Australia, I became familiar with it a few years ago, and I have always been fascinated with the concept of politics in the pub. The topic we are discussing tonight, there are so many issues to talk about. In fact, the whole situation has academics, social groups, and progressive leaders working overtime in Latin America and many countries around the world trying to understand what has happened and to repel the threat of possible return of neoliberalism to the continent. There is a very important summit going on at the moment, formed by progressive political forces, grassroots groups, and academics, along with prominent figures like Rafael Correa, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, José Pepe Mujica, in Quito, Ecuador, and it goes on from the 28th of September until the 30th of this month. All right, and the idea is to develop, first to understand what's going on, and second to develop strategies to counter and to see what can be done. But I want to say just from the outset that although things look bad at the moment, there is reason to be optimistic. My talk tonight is based mostly on a work that has been published recently by Francisco Lopez Segrera, no relationship, shortly after the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff in Brazil. Its title rightfully translates as Latin America, Crisis of Post-Neoliberalism and the Rise of the New Right. I chose to use this word because I think his analysis is quite thorough and explains the situation very well. And also because at the moment it's one of the newest and up-to-date, an up-to-date analysis of the situation. In addition to Venezuela, Brazil, and Argentina, he analyzes the post-neoliberal governments, including Uruguay, Bolivia, Ecuador, as well as Colombia and Mexico. He attributes the term post-neoliberal to the administrations that emerged from the deep economic crisis generated by the neoliberal governments of the 1990s. In most cases, this new administration adopted distinct leftist progressive features. These post-neoliberal governments have shown strong similarities in the past decade, like ideological affinity and especially the achievements of their social policies in reducing poverty in their respective countries. It is true also that they share numerous differences as well, especially when it comes to determining how far to the left these administrations have taken their political projects. And I think that Venezuela, Brazil, and Argentina are clear examples of these 50 shades of left. However, they share strong bonds when it comes to identify the roots of the economic and political crisis that are affecting these countries. But mostly, the fall of oil prices and minerals are the key root in this situation. Many authors, especially those from the neoliberal camp, tend to dismiss this factor and continue to blame the leftist government, branding them as inept and useless. They argue that other nations and governments suffer the same fall of prices and are not experiencing this crisis. Perhaps it is true, but I think it's really unfair to dismiss this factor altogether, especially when the main source of income for those countries is the export of those products. But let's break it down a little bit so we can understand, have an image of what's happening. When President Hugo Chavez launched the Bolivarian Revolution and all its social programs, the price of a barrel of oil was well above $100. There were enough funds to cover all the much-needed misiones or social programs. Now the price is well below 50. In fact, I checked it yesterday and it was around $44 and $45 a barrel. Today, there were news that OPEC has agreed to reduce the production of oil in order to maintain the prices of oil and prevent them from falling further. And the reaction of the market was immediate this morning. It jumped from $44 and $45 to $47 and $49. Coincidentally, this is an important victory for President Nicolás Maduro because he has been campaigning hard among OPEC members to reach this agreement. Now, despite this, it is not rocket science, I think. If the country's income is reduced as dramatically as this, it will definitely put a tremendous strain on any government, especially when it comes to maintaining the social programs and investment in other much-needed areas like education, health, and infrastructure. And let me make a small parenthesis here as well. In the case of Venezuela, Argentina, and Brazil, but especially for Venezuela, the issue of oil has been a very important geopolitical value, not only for Venezuela but also for the United States. That is why it is so important for the United States government to get rid of President Maduro and the Bolivarian Revolution altogether. The problem in the Middle East, especially in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, have seriously threatened and undermined U.S. interest in that region, especially when it comes to secure access to oil. If you look at the map of Latin America as well, it's again not rocket science. Venezuela is just next door to the United States. Oil from this country is easily accessible, plentiful, and let's not forget that Venezuela's natural reserves comprise roughly 300 billion barrels of oil and 196 trillion cubic feet of proven natural gas reserves. Now, the only thing needed is a friendly government. And if you closely read who in Venezuela received funds from the US foreign aid budget in 2014, 15, 16, and 17, you will notice that they have been working very hard to achieve these friendly governments. It remains to be seen if it will work. Time will tell. Now, in addition to the economic factors, there are the self-inflicted wounds in each of these governments, which were many indeed. And they play an important part in the exacerbation of this crisis. A clear example of these cases are corruption, failure to overhaul, alter, or even reform the current economic systems of production in these countries. There is also the failure to change all political systems, or perhaps one of the gravest of all, the failure to reform the judiciary, especially in Argentina and Brazil. And let's not forget the presence of virulent machismo and racism, because the hatred against Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner and Dilma Rousseff for being women, and Ignacio Lula da Silva, and especially Nicolás Maduro for coming from the working class, is beyond any scale among the elites in those countries. Now, we can spend hours talking about the roots of the crisis across the continent, but I think the ones I just mentioned suffice to give you a very general idea and to understand that there is more than it meets the eyes behind this crisis. But tonight, I want to focus your attention on what many, including Segredo, describe as the new right. I am still not convinced that there is a new right. To me, it's the same old right of the 1990s, especially when we look at the policies that they implement when they are back in power, like the case of Mauricio Macri in Argentina. And I think that Macri, believe it or not, holds the key for the future of the continent. There has been a clear change in strategy among the neoliberal right in Latin America in the past decade. Of that, there is no doubt. Right-wing candidates today try to portray themselves and their parties as more approachable and more popular, but it is only a public relations campaign which dissipates the day after the ballots are counted. The advance of progressive governments and the popularity of the social programs on the one hand, and the poor record of neoliberal candidates of the 1990s, on the other hand, resulted in constant loss of elections in the last 10 years. The record of the right-wing parties against Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, with some exception, are a clear example of this situation. We can identify similar scenarios with Cristina Fernandez in Argentina, Dilma Rousseff and Lula in Brazil, Evo Morales in Bolivia, Rafael Correa in Ecuador, Tabaré Vázquez and Pepe Mujica in Uruguay. They all defeated the neoliberals all over and over again in the past 10 decades. So it is quite clear that they had to change or they would perish. But the first question we must ask is who we have in the right-wing camp at the moment, right? We have Enrique Capriles, Leopoldo Lopez, Henry Ramos Alup, Corina Machado in Venezuela, Mauricio Macri, Sergio Massa, and a similar number of candidates in Argentina, and those in Brazil that led the impeachment against Dilma Rousseff. They all have, some more than others, very questionable democratic credentials, and it's hard to see them lasting in power for long periods of time. Segredo argues that the new right has adopted two distinct initiatives. The first one, a fresh image and electoral campaigns showing the candidates working with poor people to make them look popular, young and more caring. And the second one, when they are unable to win elections, they resort to institutional coups, d'état, like the one in Honduras in 2009 against President Zelaya, Paraguay against Fernando Lugo in 2012, and the latest one in Brazil against Dilma Rousseff. Here, the judiciary and the parliament were instrumental tools in giving these coups an aura of legitimacy, especially at a regional and international level. In Venezuela, there have been both styles. First, the new and young leaders competed against Hugo Chavez, but lost one election after another. Then they grew in frustration and turned to violence. In fact, it's the reason one of them, Leopoldo Lopez, who is the sweetheart of the US State Department, is in jail today. The victory of Macri in Argentina, the economic crisis, and the subsequent shortages and insecurity gave an opportunity to the Venezuelan right to gain some popularity and achieve an important victory in the last parliamentary elections, gaining control of the National Assembly. The person in charge of the National Assembly is Henry Ramos Alup of the Mesa de Unidad Democrática, MUD, which is an alliance of center and far-right political parties and groups. Ramos Alup is a staunch neoliberal with strong links to the US Embassy. I will be back to, and that link with the US Embassy, by the way, has been proved by WikiLeaks in several documents released by WikiLeaks. But I will be back to him in a second. But before that, let us focus a little bit on Argentina. Last October, after 13 years in government, the Kirchner administration lost the election against Mauricio Macri, but for a very narrow margin. Macri got 51% of the votes, and Miguel Scioli, the chosen candidate to succeed Cristina Fernandez in office, got 49%. The electoral campaign was brutal. Macri's party, known as the PRO, is a staunch neoliberal group disguised as a young, anti-corruption, popular, hard-working party. The message in the campaign was simple and caught the attention of many people. We need to change, we need to get rid of corruption, we need to unite the country that has been divided for too long. Let's forget about ideology, they said. Ideology is bad. Let's put an honest and hard-working businessman in the Casa Rosada, which is the presidential palace. Make this businessman dance some cumbia, which is a style of music very popular with the working class and the poor shanty towns in Argentina, and add a person in a wheelchair as a vice president, and you have a winning formula. People voted and gave Macri the narrow victory. But the question is, what has happened since he took office? Well, I can't find a better way to describe it as saying that him and his party lied his teeth off. I discussed this in a presentation recently with Latitudes early this year. Basically, Macri failed to carry out any of his promises, and that is why I argue that Macri holds the key for the future of the continent, because people will see what he's doing at the moment. He said he was not going to devalue the currency, and this was the first thing his economic team did as soon as he took office. He said that no one would lose their job, and since he took office, more than 140,000 people lost their jobs, and we're counting. Unemployment today is in the double-figure digits. He took massive debt from the IMF and the World Bank when the country was clean of debt before. He opened the country to international markets, and the local industries that had emerged in the last decade basically are about to collapse. Just yesterday, the Ámbito online newspaper, which is considered a fairly conservative media outlet, more than friendly towards Macri and his economic roadmap for Argentina, declared that the month of July presented, and I quote, the worst contraction in Argentina's economy in 14 years, reaching minus 5.9% for that month. In short, and despite constantly reassuring the people in the electoral campaign that he was not going to do so, he has reintroduced the very same policies of the 1990s. Even the economic team is formed by prominent figures of the disasters of the 1990s. Inflation continued to grow, and the reign of foreign direct investment he promised for the second semester is nowhere to be found. Now, my favorite is the way in which Macri campaigned against corruption in the Kirchner administration. He was so pure at heart that Jesus Christ looked as his disciple, and Macri was the true Son of God. But, and excuse my language, karma is a bitch, and the popular say goes, those who live in a glass house should not throw stones. Macri was doing so well until the release of the Panama Papers, and now we have the Bahama Leaks, okay, which continue to expose his financial irregularities and those of his close family and friends, and he has already been branded as one of the most corrupt presidents in the world. As he took office, he proudly and solemnly announced that all his assets are declared in the public domain. His hands were clean. I don't have any company abroad, he declared in a very serious tone in front of the cameras. But then the Panama Papers came out. He was forced to come out and tell to the public, well, yes, I had a couple of companies here and there, but they never operated. Then, as the investigation of the document and accounts continued, he claimed, well, yes, I had some earnings, but they have been declared and it's all legal. When the Panama Papers revealed all his capital offshore, he claimed, well, I didn't declare $18 million, I forgot. But now I will bring them back to the country, he said. Now, the best one is that his government, as soon as he declared that he was going to bring all the money back to the country, the parliament rushed a piece of legislation giving an amnesty to all those who have undeclared money in offshore accounts so they don't have to pay any money. Now, meanwhile, the working class people, the elderly, the pensioners, and the vast majority of the population have to struggle with the increase of prices of food, energy, health, etc. Now, I don't have much time to expand here, but something very similar took place in Brazil with the figures who headed the impeachment against Dilma. Half of the deputies involved in the process of impeachment were involved in cases of corruption. Since the beginning of the impeachment, several have been dismissed for that particular reason. Even Eduardo Cunha, the Speaker of the House, and the one who started the whole process, has been dismissed just a few weeks ago for failure to declare $50 million in counts that he have offshore as well. Now, although there is corruption among some members of the PT, and I don't deny that, okay, which is the party of Dilma, the corruption on the other side, that is the right wing, appears to be far worse. So I have briefly discussed the roots of the crisis and given you a snapshot of the so-called new right. But I also mentioned that there is hope for the millions of poor working people in these countries. On the one hand, we have the new right in power in Argentina and Brazil and in control of the parliament, pushing to get rid of President Maduro in Venezuela, trying to undermine Mercosur and other regional integration processes like UNASUR, CELAC, ALBA. The MUD's control over the National Assembly has been hopeless for the people in Venezuela. Ramos Alup focused more in fighting virulently against President Maduro and his government, and have not passed, as far as I'm aware, any piece of legislation that helped the people to overcome the shortages or anything that may improve the country's economic situation. On the contrary, it continues to torpedo every single law presented by the executive of the Socialist Party in the National Assembly. And this may have been cute at the beginning, and it gave him some support, but the clock is ticking, and people are not seeing any changes. And it's going to be hard for him to get any kind of support. Furthermore, the people still remember the policies of the 1990s, in the case they take government as well, right? And they also remember the policies of the Bolivarian Revolution, and they will not forgive or forget. In Argentina, people are already realizing that Macri lied, and big time. Meanwhile, Cristina Fernandez is silently rearranging her political force and developing a new kind of alliance with other parties, while letting nature take course and letting Macri just do what he do best, which is mess up. Her levels of popularity continue to be above 60%, despite everything that has been said. In Brazil, despite the impeachment and the economic crisis, Ignacio Lula da Silva is predicted to easily win the election because at the moment he has close to up to 80% of the acceptance among the voting population. Temer is very unpopular, and there is no candidate among his rank on the right-wing parties able to capture the people's support. As Abraham Lincoln once said, you can fool all the people some of the time, and some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. There is a lot more to talk about, especially reading geopolitical strategies, economics, and the global markets. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, the ones I have discussed tonight are enough to have a basic understanding, and most importantly, at a time when many are panicking about the future of the region, to realize that by no means this is the end of the progressive cycle, as many tend to describe it. All the contrary. The progressive forces are alive, and I have no doubt it will come back sooner rather than later. It's going to be difficult. A lot of things are going to happen in between, but I don't see this comeback of the new right as something long term. Thank you.